The Direction of Change by A. B. Published in From Under the Rubble, edited by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. First published by the YMCA Press in Paris in 1974. The Direction of Change. At the beginning of this century, to the bewilderment and annoyance of many who thought themselves sufficiently in tune with the spirit of the age, there appeared in Russian society a broad movement toward philosophic idealism. A certain Kiev professor observed at the time that this interest in idealism and the amount of attention devoted to it demonstrated individual faith in the writers who preached it, rather than any genuine readiness on the part of society as a whole to abandon philosophic positivism and the various forms of philosophic materialism that had taken root in our country. One gets the impression, he said, that society is now faced with an urgent question. Where does truth lie? In idealism or positivism? But society is not ready to provide an answer. The ground on which the seed of idealism might bring forth abundantly has yet to be plowed. Positivism exploits this situation so as to maintain its dominance. These words, spoken 70 years ago, have turned out to be prophetic. Positivism, unscrupulous as to means, has held on to power for nearly a century. But today, Russian society faces the same question once more. Once more, an answer is urgently demanded, while society seems all the less prepared for it, all the more caught unawares. Truly, one has to admit that our society is in a lamentable state. This absence of public opinion, this indifference to duty, justice, and truth, this cynical contempt for human thought and dignity, can lead only to despair. Pushkin's words, but they could have been uttered today. And on the face of it, one is left repeating those words about unplowed ground. But history moves in a mysterious way, and lends itself little to logical analysis. The path of reason and cognition, based on the gradual exercise of thought and the accumulation of judgments logically arrived at, is not the only one possible either for society or for the individual, and it is not the most important. There is also the path of lived spiritual experience, the path of integral intuitive perception. Has our own history of the past 70 years not taught us something? It has been a harsh and terrible period. Many times it has seemed that Russia was dead, that the old Russia no longer existed, that the preference of facelessness to individuality had caused the whole nation to lose itself. But was this really so? Did not a handful of Russian poets and writers survive those years? And surely the killings and tortures we experienced did not shape only nonentities. We had our martyrs and heroes, and even when they went unheard and unrecognized, they were preparing the way for the rebirth of society to some sort of a new life. Early as it is to draw definite conclusions, I believe an answer of sorts to the question, where is the truth, is already emerging. Just as the body rejects a foreign implant, there is now in progress a rejection of positive philosophy and all its accompanying official ideology. Our society is covering it with a scab of skepticism, so that this graft is no longer attached to the living soul, as it was 70 or 100 years ago, but is rejected by it. But that is not enough. We need new spiritual energies, a source of positive influence. Let us dare to express the cautious hope that such an influence for good already exists in our society. Mysteriously and unsuspected by the busy multitude, Christian consciousness, once almost defunct, is stealing back. In the last few years, Christianity's word has suddenly and miraculously invoked a response in the hearts of many whose whole education, way of life, and fashionable ideas about alienation and the historical pessimism of contemporary art would seem to have cut them off from it irrevocably. It is as if a door had opened while nobody was looking. Why is this rebirth taking place in our country, where Christianity is attacked particularly systematically and with great brutality, while the rest of the world suffers a general decline in faith and religious feeling? Once again, our history over the last 50 years provides a clue to one of the reasons. We have passed through such bottomless pits. We have been so exposed to all the winds of Kolyma. We have experienced such utter exhaustion of human resources that we have learned to see the one essential that cannot be taken away from man, and we have learned not to look to human resources for succor. In glorious destitution, in utter defenselessness in the face of suffering, our hearts have been kindled by an inner spiritual warmth and have opened to new, unexpected impulses. Now, when the walls of our houses have become a little warmer and less collapsible, we are haunted by an obscure but insistent foreboding of impending historical change. It manifests itself in the general feeling that things cannot go on like this, and as yet has assumed no fixed shape. But the shape of our future development is, of course, the more important question of our time. It will form itself somehow, but everything depends on how precisely. Two factors I have mentioned, the return of Christian consciousness and the presentiment of change, mark the special responsibilities of our time. It is hard not to link the two. In fact, backsliding and denials notwithstanding, we live in a Christian culture, in a Christian age, and it is Christianity that is the fermenting agent, the yeast of the world, causing history to rise like dough in a trough, and not only in the past, but in the future as well. We are profoundly convinced that Christianity alone possesses enough motive force gradually to inspire and transform our world. Therefore, the only question that remains is how profoundly we succeed in understanding this fact and embodying it in our lives in our time. Acknowledging this, we must consider what we should do and what we should strive for. Christianity is more than a system of views. It is a way of life. Much has been well written about this, and well lived, beginning with the apostles and ending with our own contemporaries. It would be wrong now to snatch something hastily from this vast and priceless living experience, just to drape over the feebleness of our deeds and thoughts. The briefest inspection of our pitiful arsenal will be sufficient to convince us that it is quite unequal to the tasks before us. When we think of the necessity for change, our thoughts follow the beaten path to decentralization of the system, or the struggle for social reconstruction. The most dynamic and resolute forces in our society are already hankering for such a struggle, not to mention those who are always glad to escape inner emptiness through outward activity. But as we already know, the fallacy of all revolutions is that they are strong and concrete on the negative and destructive side, and limp and abstract on the positive and creative side. This is how Dostoevsky defined the underlying cause. The bee knows the formula of its hive, and the ant the formula of its ant hills, but man does not know his formula. The reason why man does not know his formula is that, unlike the bee and the ant, which are not free, man is free. Freedom is man's formula, but he will never find it so long as he seeks it in parties and ideologies, however good they may be in themselves. This freedom is not man's natural inheritance, but rather the aim of his life, and a supernatural gift. Servitude to sin is how Christianity defines the normal condition of man's soul, and it summons man to free himself from the servitude. The path of heroic spiritual striving is the only path that can lead man, and the whole of society, to freedom. The authors of the Vecchi, that is, Landmarks, anthology, wrote of these things 70 years ago, S. Bulgakov and S. Frank in particular, but few understood them at the time. So is it not time, after almost 200 years of obsession with the social idea, to turn to this path, clearing our minds of the ideal of the fighter and replacing it with the ideal of the visionary? What a word! The modern tongue can scarcely pronounce it, so accustomed are we in our arrogance to reject this ideal from the lofty heights of our struggle for the common cause. The nearest words our vocabulary can find for this goal are now self-improvement and the theory of small causes. What a blunder! What a stubborn refusal to come to our senses! The point is not that we should cease to strive for a better social order, but that the truth about this order is one of those truths that cannot be grasped by reason, but can only be learned by living and acting, and are accessible only to the consciousness that is already enlightened. And, until we bring about a change in ourselves, even the best-intentioned attempts to restructure anything from outside, by decree or by force, are doomed at best to come to naught. As in Reptilov's, we are making a commotion, my friend, and at worst to end in Dostoevsky's Possessed, with all the logical consequences that we know so well. The age we are now living in is a vital one for our nation. Historical action has time limits, and if the chance is missed, it will be a very long time before it presents itself again. One may well ask, how is it that ye do not discern this time? Luke 12:56. Will we have the perception and determination to reform our nature from inside, and through this, our common life? Suffering and sorrow ennoble the individual and society alike, so long as they are correctly understood and accepted. But if, like many others, for any number of reasons, we are unwilling to recognize the responsibility we bear for this present age of our history, if we attempt simply to forget these sufferings and to live as if nothing had happened, erasing them from our history, as it were, then we are doomed. Then we shall again be obliged to continue between two parallel processes: the eradication of the smallest stirrings of the living soul and thought from above, and the swelling of impotent hatred and rage from below. In this way, good will be repelled on both fronts until history repeats itself and punishes us for our obduracy. We must conserve and assimilate the vast spiritual strength for which we in our country have paid so dearly. We must transform it into an inward fortress of resistance to lies and violence, to the point of laying down our lives, if necessary. And this transformation must take place within our souls. It will be very difficult. Now, especially, when the path of spiritual striving is in direct conflict with every contemporary aspiration of mankind, when rising material demands, egged on by every kind of advertising, and the capacity to fulfill those demands are regarded to all intents and purposes as the main criterion of the level of a society's development, when incessant interference by television, cinema, sport, and newspapers drowns the inner voice. Now the accessibility of travel and entertainment acts as a constant distraction from our inner affairs. The world has never seemed so noisy. Never has the entertainment industry, the industry of the spiritual pabulum of mass information, so completely dominated mankind. This is why men feel such terrible spiritual chaos inside them. This is why they have lost touch with reality. This is why truth has become so dangerously relative. Genuine reality and genuine activity have been hunted down and cast out. Waves of aimless external irritation toss us hither and thither on the surface of the sea of life. Christianity teaches the concept of abstinence, the cleansing of the soul, spiritual repose, the aspiration toward inner simplicity and harmony. We should begin with this, for only to the abstinent spirit is truth revealed, and only truth liberates. There is no need to begin with external solutions. We must achieve the sort of spiritual condition that enables solutions to be dictated from within by the immutable laws of compassion and love. Mysterious inner freedom, once achieved, will give us a sense of community with everybody and responsibility for all. So long as we achieve it in fact, not merely in wishful thinking, everything else will come of its own accord. Without it, on the other hand, any social order will be no more than iron and clay mixed by human hands. But we are confused. In the search for a solution, our eyes habitually turn toward the West. They have more progress and democracy. But in the West, the most sensitive people are trying, with similar alarm and hope, to learn something from us. They assume, probably not unreasonably, that our harsh and oppressed life has taught us something that might be able to counteract the artificiality and soullessness of their own world, something that they have lost in all their worldly bustle. So, perhaps, if we can assimilate our experience and somehow put it to use, it may serve to complement Europe's experience. Then Russia will escape Chadayev's bitter prophecy of being nothing but a yawning void, an object lesson to other nations. Nestor the chronicler compared our people to the 11th hour laborers. If instead of standing around in the marketplace, we answer the call to the vineyard owner, we shall not be too late at the end of the day to receive the same wage as the rest.